Hi and welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see everyone here. Welcome, Emily, Kimberly, Kevin, Rosette, Scott. And we are missing a couple people, but they will join us shortly. So we have a great lineup today. Starting off our Love and LRC event, we're going to have this lovely panel discussion, engaging a lot of topics that are troublesome, but worth the risk. Um, so yeah, jumping right into things, I just want to introduce all our presenters. We have Rosette Scotland representing UESTT. Hi, Rosette. Of course.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Then we will have Scott Machak. I hope I'm not butchering anyone's name from Saikai. Hi, Scott.
Hi everyone.
We will then be joined by Michael Clark, who is a UE alumni. Forgive us, he's having a little bit of technical difficulties. So we hope we will hear from him shortly. Then we will have our very own Darren James from IGDS Ignite, who will also join us shortly. After Darren, we have Emily Bachan. I hope I did not butcher that. I'm sorry if I did. From SBA UE. Yay. And then we have Kevin Ramjatan from Scora TTMSA, followed by Kimberly Gilbert from FPA. And then we close with a crosstalk among the panelists about everything that we've discussed so far. All right. But before we continue, I just want to highlight all the activism that has been going on locally towards ending violence against women. This particular program was actually scheduled for last week, but we've postponed it because we felt that the spotlight needed to be where it was. That being said, we do want to recognize and reflect on all victims that we've lost over the years gone by, particularly in 2021. And, our hearts go out to them. So we do want to recognize these persons and in our hearts just say a little thank you for their lives and, you know, mourn for them publicly by having a 60 seconds of silence. So we'll start that now. So all mics can be muted. All right. All right. So again, our hearts go out to the families and the friends of these persons, and hopefully, we'll be able to affect change with our demonstrations and protests and all the various forms of activism that everyone has been engaging in. On a lighter note, we'd like to begin with Miss Rosette. Hi, Rosette. I hope you're ready to start. Rosette will be speaking to us about mental and physical sexual health and the impact this may have on relationships. So we'd like to give the floor to Rosette now. Okay.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosette Scotland, as mentioned earlier, and I am the Vice President of Programming and Volunteerism at the UE Students Today, Alumni Tomorrow, St. Augustine campus. Today, I've been asked, as mentioned, to speak on mental health as well as physical and sexual health and the impact on relationships. When we think of health using the World Health Organization's definition as a reference, we know that health is more than simply the absence of infirmity or weakness, but rather health is the complete well-being of individuals, physically, mentally, emotionally, and socially. Sexual health is no different. When we examine our health relative to sex, the lack of sexually transmitted infection, disease may not always equate to one's complete and optimal sexual health. Your mental health in relation to your sexual health must be considered. In relationships, partners disclose various aspects of their lives, and an important component to this is their disclosure of their sexual health status. Individuals who may suffer with anxiety or depression when faced with the news of their sexual health status may struggle with disclosing this information to their partners. When this happens, it places both their partner and themselves at risk. And studies have shown, for example, HIV disclosure to sexual partners facilitates joint decision making, risk reduction strategies for safer sex behaviors, but disclosure may be impacted by depression symptoms. The human immunodeficiency virus, which is among one of the major health problems faced worldwide, has a significant psychological impact on young and adult couples. One study was once conducted to understand the physiological impact that non-disclosure of seropositivity has on marital relationships. And in this study, they discovered that all of the participants had not disclosed their HIV status to their partners. It was concluded, therefore, that non-disclosure of HIV positive diagnosis between couples affects them on many psychological levels, and persons who did not disclose their status would struggle with anxiety, blame, changes in sexual patterns, social isolation, even alcohol and drug use. In most cases, sometimes suicide attempts, depression, and other problems would negatively interfere with the couple's relationship status, thus reducing their overall quality of life. The example here was given on your HIV status, however, but it is also true for disclosure of one's reproductive health status. Given that reproductive disorders affect millions of persons per year, some of you may have even come across instances where couples, after failing to address issues on their reproductive health in earlier stages of the relationship, may encounter issues with discoveries of infertility or other life-threatening conditions. It is therefore clear that non-disclosure can negatively impact on the trust in a relationship as well as one's mental health. Your mental health, when it comes to your sexual health status, should be explored individually and as a unit when in a relationship. When open lines of communication are present, there are greater opportunities for resolutions for inner conflict and turmoils of anxiety and depression to be addressed. Disclosure of one's sexual health status is an important protective behavior for individuals to engage in, as it could lead to improved mental and physical health outcomes, such as adherence to treatment, and even lead to improvements in your overall well-being. Therefore, in relationships, your sexual, mental, and physical health should be placed at the forefront of a relationship. Difficult but honest conversations should be encouraged to ensure that best practices are adopted between you and your partner. So today, if you feel the urge after our discussions to delve deeper into research and information gathering, you can feel free to contact the Health Services Unit at the University of the West Indies Star Campus, as who offers rapid testing for HIV for students and staff. However, you can also look to online sources who also provide information such as the UNAIDS in Trinidad and Tobago, or groups, a civil society organization that provides psychological care for people living with HIV, just to name a few of the available resources out there. And to speak on UWI role in this in our attempt to join the conversation, we always annually support information sharing and awareness on World AIDS Day, where we host events to just provide information on students. And we encourage everyone today and onwards to just be a part of the conversation, take a reflective look on both your mental as well as physical sexual health. And I thank you for listening to me today.
Okay, so all right, so thank you so much for that, Rosette. A very thoughtful and interesting piece, right? So now we have Miss Emily. No, sorry, sorry about that. So following Rosette, we'll have Scott Marchak. Yes, Scott Marchak. My bad. From Psychi, who will be giving us a little thought-provoking tidbit on relationships and pleasure. And let's go, Scott.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be speaking today. So today I'm going to be talking about relationships and pleasure, but more specifically, I'm going to be talking about how we can actually be using dating apps and hookup apps nowadays because of the pandemic. You know, we can't really meet people in the same way. But these apps have opened up alternative ways of doing that, and it's important for us to connect with people. You know, from a evolutionary perspective, it's what has kept us alive. And I want to talk about how we could use these apps in the search for pleasure and relationships, but how we can do it ethically and with compassion. So just to keep it concise, because I had a lot of things and a lot of ideas to talk about for this particular topic. But what I've really done to keep it concise is to create a kind of a list of do's and don'ts when it is you're navigating these types of websites and apps. So I'm going to get right into it. The first thing that I've written down is don't assume monogamy. Whenever you're on these dating websites, it's not about, you know, connecting with just one person, and don't assume that the person that you're connecting with that you're the only person that they're going to be talking to. Using dating apps is about taking your time and connecting and getting to know different people, you know. Another don't is don't engage in unethical texting patterns. And by that, I mean, don't do things like ghosting people. Don't do things like keep people hanging around just because you're bored. You know, and don't be rude. Don't be rude to people. Another purpose of using a dating app is to reteach people about their value and their beauty. So, you know, be honest and be open, and try to express your disinterest in a more discerning way, which is my next do. It is to be practicing honesty and letting a person down easy if you're not interested in them, because you wouldn't want somebody to, you know, kind of be rude and mean to you if they weren't interested in you. So please practice being open and honest, and do it compassionately. My next don't is please do not be a sexual racist or xenophobe. And by that, I mean, sometimes from personal experience, I've been using Grindr, which for some of you all who don't know is a gay hookup app. Sometimes you'll see people advertising things like no Indians, no Venezuelans, no blacks, things like that. And that is a big no-no. You know, it's true that sometimes we do have preferences in the partners that we're searching for, but advertising those things, it's just plain and simple racism. Don't do it. Don't ever do that, ever. My other don't is never, ever, ever police anyone's body. Your body is not an achievement. Please know this. And you're not actually promoting health when you're shaming people about their body types. So please, again, don't use terms on these websites like #NoFats, because what you're actually doing is promoting a culture of toxic body ideals, and you're engaging in fat shaming and body bigotry. So please always remember that #all bodies are beach bodies, okay? My next don't is please do not entertain oppressive notions about sexuality and gender, right? Because something that I see again on Grindr a lot is people say things like hashtag no femmes, hashtag mask for mask. Please don't shame people about their gender expression, because again, you're promoting toxic masculinity, homophobia, and also misogyny, because you're devaluing femininity, right? Again, another please don't engage in sexual or mental health shaming. When we make a decision to have sex with someone, you need to know that no sex is safe and that there are always risks associated with it. And the people that are open about their sexual health statuses do not deserve prejudice from you. Don't use terms like looking for clean sex, because that assumes that persons who are living with STDs are unclean, and that just continues to promote stigma and discrimination. So please don't do it. And we've reached some do's, so please do keep an open mind, and keeping an open mind when you're using these apps keeps your brain stimulated in new and exciting ways, and it's been proven scientifically. So please, keep an open mind when using these apps, and don't come with a checklist of what you do and don't want. Please try to promote sex positivity. There's a book called, I think it's called The Ethical Slut. And I want all of you to be ethical sluts when you're out there using these apps for hookups or whatever it is. And what that really means is that you're taking this pejorative term and reclaiming it to simply mean that you're promoting and accepting the enjoyment of pleasure and sex and intimacy with others, but you do it in an honest and an ethical way. And lastly, do take a break whenever it is that you're using these apps, because burnout is real. Dating app burnout is very real, especially because of the fact that sometimes when we're constantly talking to people that aren't interested in us, it can actually take a toll on our self-esteem. And, that reinforces the idea that you need to be compassionate and discerning when it is that you're expressing disinterest in someone. But also you should know that don't take it personally. Like, to quote the old saying, there are plenty of other fish in the sea. And the last thing I'd like to say before I close off, because I think I am running out of time, is a final word on consent, especially nowadays. A lot of people, because of the current social climate in Trinidad, a lot of people are talking about policy change and jail, no bail, and all these types of things. And while these things are very necessary, the root of the issues that we're facing today with gender-based violence and domestic violence is really one that is very much rooted in patriarchy and the way that we socialize our men and boys. And so we need to start by teaching them from young about consent. And the two types of consent that I'd like to talk to you about today before I close off is informed consent, which is essentially letting someone know everything that you think that they should know before you engage in any sort of activities with them off of these dating apps. And nothing is off the table. State what it is you're looking for. State, whether it is you're polyamorous, if you're just looking for a one-night stand, if you're just looking to go on dates and hang out with people, whatever it is, you should also have very open and honest discussions about your sexual health. So remember to be open and honest. And that's really what informed consent is about. And the second type of consent I'd like to talk about is compassionate consent. And what compassionate consent is really about, it's about empowering people to say no. And don't ever assume that just because somebody says yes to one thing, it means that they're saying yes to everything. So just because somebody's making out with you and it's hot and steamy, it doesn't mean that they want you to take off their clothes. That is blanket consent. Don't ever assume that. It has to happen in a number of steps. You should constantly be asking someone, is this okay? If I do this, does this feel good? And a lot of people have issues asking those things, especially when it is during sex, because we think that consent isn't really sexy. Like, no, but it is absolutely necessary. And you can make it very sexy by asking those types of questions. Like, does this feel good? And, is it, do you like it when I do this? Asking things like that, it can be very sexy and it is absolutely necessary. So that's basically everything I I wanted to touch on, and I hope that you can take everything that I talked about today and use it when you decide to use these types of apps, so you can be a more ethical and compassionate person in the search for relationships and pleasure. And also, when you practice these points that I've just spoken about, you're actually removing barriers that you know barriers towards experiencing more intense pleasure and from having more meaningful interactions and relationships and more satisfying relationships as well. So yeah, I think that's a wrap on me. Ciao for now. Thank you everyone for listening.
Wow, Scott, thank you so much for all of that. It's a lot to think about. And actually, I want to keep you on screen a little bit longer and engage some other things. Well, some of the things that you did touch on. Thank you for taking it to the virtual space, given, the whole COVID situation and, really making that link with how life has changed and we're all in this virtual reality now. Um, hashtag Jamiroquai. Anyway, so you made a point earlier, and what immediately came to mind was the very thin line between preference and prejudice. When you were highlighting, how some things are not only negative but possibly disrespectful and point blank racist in terms of, what we post in terms of our preference. It comes across as a prejudice and so on. Can you expand a little bit more on that point for me?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what it's like on, if anybody here has ever experienced it for themselves on any dating apps, but I mean, for sure, being a gay man and using apps like Grinder, Grinder is really a space where you see so much prejudice and it's so layered in so many different forms. And yeah, one of the things that you do see is like people will have very specific prejudices in the way that it's very, very offensive and disrespectful. And they think that it's just a preference. And if you try to approach some people, they're very, what's the word, like very adamant in their opinion, like no, it's just a preference. And people, I've had discussions with people where they say things like, no, you're just too sensitive and that's just how it is. And it's very difficult and sometimes very discouraging when you're in activist spaces like this to have that kind of being contested in that way when you're just trying to foster more openness and as I said, open-mindedness. I've had people say very, very disrespectful things to me, like I'm just a little coolie boy who this and that, and things like that. And it's very disrespectful, and I don't know if I've expanded on
Yes.
enough,
I
but yeah.
think what I'm specifically hearing out of that point you made is that a lot of times people have on like essentially blinders where they are not open to other perspectives and are it's a lack of openness to the point where they completely disregard another preference and privilege what they believe in as the standard and my way or the highway kind of thing. And of course that closes the door to essentially letting people live themselves, live their truth and be free to be themselves, and that is in itself problematic. The next thing is, you were talking so much about consent, and it's very interesting that you segued into consent, very appropriate as well, because the reality is once there is no consent, that is essentially rape, and that is something that we don't articulate. A lot of people don't articulate that fact. Even within relationships, if your partner says no, or they may have said no, and you keep pushing, if it's coerced, it's not consent, and once there is no consent, that is rape. And on that point, I want us to get into a brief video that I really do enjoy. I hope everyone enjoys it too. It's called Consent Doubles.
Doubles. I mean, who don't love doubles? Whether you like it light on the pepper, heavy on the sweet sauce, it's hard not to love doubles. So suppose you and somebody liming and you get a feeling for doubles. You tell them, I get a feeling for doubles. You. They say, yeah, doubles go be a flick. Well then doubles go be the flick. But if you say, you want doubles? And they say, nah, I ain't really sure. You could bring back 2 slides for them. But if they don't eat it, there's no scene. Check it, Don't force nobody to eat doubles. Don't come with no outer time and talk about, oh, I stand up in the line so long, wait for next set of barra to reach to bring doubles for you. Here, man, it is not their fault you buy doubles for them in case they wanted it, and now they don't want it. I mean, it's annoying as they done gone through all of that scene to get the doubles, but you had to respect the fact that they just not feeling for it anymore. They did want the doubles, and now they don't. There's no scene for people to change their mind. Don't force nobody to eat doubles because you went out your way to get it. And if they flat out say, nah, it's alright, then don't get them no doubles at all. Don't get them doubles. Don't make them eat doubles. Don't get vexed for them for not wanting your doubles. They just don't want no doubles. I mean, suppose if they just only eat from a certain doubles man in Curab. Suppose they don't eat fried food. Don't pressure them into taking your doubles. And don't make them have to give you no explanation as to why they don't want your doubles. Check another scene. You're checking? If they are unconscious or asleep, don't even think about getting them doubles. If they're unconscious or they're sleeping, how could they answer if somebody asks them if they want doubles? Alright, maybe they were conscious when you asked them, and they say, yeah, that sounds good. But by the time you come back with the doubles, they knock out. Put away the doubles, check that they're okay, and most important, don't make them eat no doubles. If they had say yes to the doubles, they start to yam it down and then they knock out before they finish. Don't try and force the rest of doubles in their mouth. Put away the doubles and make sure they're safe. Trust me. Unconscious people don't want doubles. If somebody say yes to the doubles in a line by you last week, that don't mean they want doubles all the time. You can't just roll up by them anytime you want with doubles and force them to eat it, and when they get upset you get vexed and say, oh, where's your scene? You did real with my doubles last week. Here now. You don't find that dotish? You wouldn't force feed somebody doubles because they say yes to it last week. Of course, you wouldn't push doubles down the throat of an unconscious person because they say yes to it 5 minutes ago when they were conscious. But if you could understand how completely ridiculous it is to force people to have doubles when they don't want doubles, then how hard it is to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's doubles or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I go in and get me some doubles.
All right. So a lot of good things. That is, I mean, only in Trinidad you could, think through consents in terms of doubles. But anyway, on that note, we have Mr. Darren James from Ignite, our very own, who will be expanding on the idea of consent that Mr. Machak so eloquently introduced us to, and we saw some information on in the video. All right. So is Darren in? He's ready. One moment, please. All right, so I think we are having a little bit of a delay, but that's fine. So about this video, I want to hear from the panelists right now, all the other members of the panelists. How was this video for you?
That was a very interesting perspective.
Right?
But it draw the point. So
yeah.
I love this video, particularly because I'm familiar with the English version of it, which is consent using T.
Yeah.
And so this adaptation, the local one with the doubles, I think is ideal, and it really brings it home for persons who may not understand. This is a Caribbean context that people will definitely understand. So I love this video. It explains it perfectly.
Yeah. But I mean, just, the ideas that are resonant in them. If someone falls asleep during, that you might have had consent before, but consent and right there, right?
And so I think as you touch on that as well, they would have also mentioned you give someone doubles before, it doesn't mean you have to show up by their house every time.
Right.
Just offering them doubles, So I think there's a lot that can be dissected to talk about consent with individual, and it's really, really rich in that respect.
Right. Yes. So I'm seeing my dear friend Darren on the screen right now, and good. Yeah, you're ready to go, Darren?
Ready on the spot.
Darren, I'm slightly disappointed because you're not wearing your consent specialist shirts.
I was gonna wear it, but I just like, I feel for purple today. So I just feel,
I mean, it's a great message, power in action. And of course, yes, we are recognizing, power for women and power to end violence against women. So I love it, but I was looking forward to that consent specialist. Anyway, on that note, take it away, Darren.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here and listening to what I have to say. So, going on the note of the consent doubles video, the first time I saw it, I stood up in in front of the library and watched it for a whole 3 times at least because it was funny. But it was funny, but the message is there. The message is there. It's going on, and it's penetrating anyone who can understand English, especially to that Trinidadian twang. You can understand. It doesn't have to be that you are. It doesn't have to be in a special way to get a message through. It could be as simple as possible, and that message could be there. So going on to consent now. A lot of persons have issues understanding basic English of no or yes, or what does a no actually mean. Before we continue, no is no, yes is yes, maybe is a no, is a no, yes, no, no is no. A hesitant yes is a no. Until you can get a firm yes in a clear state, that's a yes, a clear mind. Remember that. If you're sober and the other person is drunk, reschedule at a different date, Let's or make a good decision on a clear mind. Excuse me. Right, as I said, make a clear decision on a clear mind because these situations can turn to in a second. It can turn so, what should I say, traumatic. It can turn violent. It can turn good. It can turn bad. And consent is very key to stopping these situations where one person can get hurt, one person can get traumatized, or both parties could face such a horrific experience. And I would like to ask persons who are here. I know each individual is different, and how they speak is different, how they interact is different. And sit down with your friend, partner, whatever they are to you, and have open discussions. It's hard to bring up. Trust me, it is. I know. I understand for some persons it is hard to bring up because it's something like an unspoken. It's just an any moment kind of thing, a spur of the moment kind of thing. What you don't know is that spur of the moment could end you up as in a spur of the moment prison cell, or spur of the moment police come knocking on the door because you couldn't understand or you didn't want to understand the different signs that comes along with these things. And going on in relationships in particular, when you keep how should I say, things get stale, people say things get stale or it gets boring, we can go on to try new things. And I bet a lot of persons have heard the joke, just when they do it from the back, just slide it in and watch you and whatever. It's all kicks until somebody actually does it and doesn't understand how far that can go for someone else, how mentally or physically traumatic it is, because it's pain, especially when you're not prepared for it. It's pain. Infection is a thing. That's not my part, but speaking to your partner about how these things can, how you can initiate these actions like this is very key to a relationship, and not to get into these kind of situations, sticky situations, where you can get yourself in a lot of trouble or get yourself in an unwanted situation we now have an awkward situation where your partner now doesn't trust you. You had that trust that they didn't have to look at you and monitor you, but now you have lost that trust. They have lost that faith in you to be a person I could turn my back on and you will not stab me in the back, literally. Literally. I know you will not stab me in the back. And understand that these are very traumatic experiences that I'm speaking about, and we will be speaking about in this entire broadcast here. So persons who are not okay with these things, I'm sorry. Please, if you're not comfortable, feel free to come off and come back on. If you need help, please do find that help. Please do find that Zen area. Daniela, are you still with me?
Yes, I am. Are you hearing me, Darren?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
All right. So I'm still here, and it's very interesting that these topics that you've engaged, because what you're essentially articulating is by definition intimate partner violence. And a lot of times, yes, we don't say those actual words. This is intimate partner violence. This is domestic violence, but really and truly it is. When you're breaching someone's confidence, when you're breaching someone's security, even in that sexual space, it is still a violent act towards that person. And by definition, that is intimate partner violence, which is illegal, right? You can have a run-in with the law. And I mean, aside from having a run-in with the law, the reality is if this is your partner, then the assumption is that you love and care for this person and you do not want to injure them in any way, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, or on any level at all. So it's something to look at. And on the note of violence, yes, that is within the private sphere. But we can take the balance to the public sphere. And it's the same underlying principles in terms of that power dynamic that is resonant there, that allows for similar violence, similar acts of sexual violence within the public sphere. For example, when you engage harassment and so on, particularly sexual harassment and instances of catcalling and so on in the public space, these are all violations against the person, not in the private, but in the public space. And on that note, we do have a statement from our catcalls of UE that we want to read. Unfortunately, we could not get a representative with us, but they were kind enough to submit a statement that we will read to you all. So I will just pull that up. Give me a minute. Darren, feel free to respond to what I just said as I open it up.
You were on point. You were on the ball. The public sphere, private sphere, they intersect, and in a way, people don't really understand totally these situations. While you might think, oh, it's only in the home, they only do that at home. It can manifest so differently, but still there, still prevalent in the public sphere, as you said. These certain, what should I say, these acts in the public or private sphere, say public, these persons act a certain way, you can more than assume that certain things go on in the private, and these things happen in private, you can more than assume that certain things will happen in the public.
Right. All right. So from the catcalls of UE team, we have this statement. They're engaging specifically with street harassment, and it reads, street harassment is one of the most pervasive forms of violence against women and girls. It falls under gender-based violence and includes catcalling, unwanted comments, gestures, honking, and uninvited sexual advances from strangers in a public space. In Trinidad, street harassment is a social norm. Catcalling can be defined as to whistle or yell something sexually suggestive to a stranger, usually in passing. It is mainly used to catch the attention of a female. However, it is not a recommended method of flattering someone. Many believe that catcalling is harmless. As Darren said earlier, we believe it is harmless. Many believe catcalling is harmless and merely just a joke or even a compliment. But the reality is, catcalling is an explicit demonstration of power, one that is intended to frighten or intimidate the person it is addressed to. It is based in a deep-rooted gender inequality which sees women's bodies as not their own. Women often feel unsafe, fearful, nervous, self-conscious, objectified, and degraded when being catcalled. Some popular local catcalls include Reds, Psst, Darky, Smally, Tallest, and the list goes on. Tips for handling a catcaller. Hold men accountable. Refusing to address a catcaller or acknowledge them can actually result in further verbal assault, being touched or grabbed, and even physical sexual assault. Tips such as just cross the street, wear something different, or walk in a group does not actually address the issue of catcalling. Instead, hold your friends accountable. Stop the next catcaller you see and inform them of its negative effects rather than blaming the victim. We have to change the narrative in order to effect change. All right, so that was from Catcalls of Yui, and a very powerful message. The reality is, yes, a lot of us take it for granted that it's not a joke, that it's normalized, it's part of our culture. It might seem a rite of passage for some young men, but it is a violation, right? You are violating someone. It's unwanted, and that's the end of story. And even if we relate it back to consent, it's unwanted, it's unconsensual, right? So any comments from the rest of the panel?
Before we continue, let me just give you all a little joke. What I like to do when someone catcalls a friend next to you in the group. So I'm gonna give you as the recent incident. Sit down by Mario's on the avenue, and me and some friends outside. One female to three guys eating pizza, normal. A truck passes. This Japanese truck. This truck stopped by stoplight. The guy in the middle peeps out and baby, and well, I didn't hear him. I eat my pizza, enjoying the talk. My friend, female friend, sit down his side, looks at him, looks at me, looks at us. And me now, what I like to do, I like to look back at them, baby, and send back one for them. Put them in check. It wasn't she calling, it had to be me. I would allow it. As we see consent. I consent to suiting me. Do you want to suit me? Are we having something here? It really just, especially when they are homophobic, this face makes me smile to know that they understand now what
it feels like.
Yes. She feels it constantly, but he now understands what she just felt. I don't want you. Why are you suiting me? That's the point of why I suit back. So
right.
just that little funny game. I mean, that could result in violence too, as Denise said. Women will get highly offended.
It's actually very interesting that you should give that example, because recently I was speaking with one of my lecturers, and she made the point that a lot of persons that engage in catcalling are actually straight men. Right? This is not a hit against anyone. This is just a reality. It's a lot of straight men, and it's often directed at women. And you might say, well, what if it happened to you? And they'll be like, if a woman suit me, I had no problem with that, blah, 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 and whatever. But the reality is, if it were someone from the LGBTQI community, then they have a problem, because they're like, well, I don't want that, and get away from me. And they get very aggressive. And yes, it can result in violence. But it is the idea that in that situation, suddenly it's a problem, because you now realize that you are not consenting to this. This is violating your person, and you have a problem. Every single female usually has a problem when someone is catcalling her. It is disgusting. It is a violation. We don't want it. Please stop.
Yeah, and I just like to say it, as you rightly said, it is unwanted. It's not that it's different when it comes from someone from the queer community. It's that it is simply unwanted, and it's about the fact that these guys think that they have the privilege. They are privileged enough to be able to go against that and do whatever they want. And no, you can't.
Yeah. And I mean, it honestly speaks to where we are as a society in terms of being inclusive. We might speak a big talk every so often about, yes, we're inclusive and everyone is welcome and so on. But we really and truly live in a very heteronormative society where people aren't open minded. It might be tough to hear, but that is our reality. People are not open minded. And the reality of such privileges existing where, if someone from the LGBTQI community were to do it, then they risk violence being, impacted on them. And if someone that is a heteronormative straight man does it, it's okay. Tells you there isn't a fair ground where we are inclusive and we accept everybody regardless of their sexuality and so on. And I mean, there are so many different intersections, because when you just think of catcalling alone and the catcalls that you hear, sometimes it's based on race. You'll, like, for example, the comment reds, that is layered in race and so many different, aspects of status and colorism and all of that. So there's a lot of cross section in that one thing, and a lot of ways in which privilege and prejudice are at play, and power dynamics and so on. So yeah. All right. On that note, I think we would like to switch to Emily. Hi, Emily. So we're lining you up. Emily will be talking to us about harassment and boundaries and the impact on mental health. Yeah?
Yep. Hi, everyone. As you know, I'm Emily. I'm representing the Student Psychology Association as the president of the club of UB. So I'm going to be speaking about harassment and boundaries with respect to the impact of it on mental health, right? So I'm briefly going to go into it because I feel like all my colleagues before spoke about it in different ways, but I have a different perspective to share, okay? So as you know, sexual harassment is any form of sexual behavior that is offensive or humiliating or even intimidating to persons, right? And this can happen on the streets, and it can happen in intimate relationships, right? So publicly and privately. And studies have shown that this harassment has increased the risk of persons experiencing anxiety, like social anxiety. And this stems from persons like having instilled fear, especially women, right? Like when you're going down, walking on the streets, like one of the colleagues said before me, the soothing and all these dialogues that they put towards us, it's really uncalled for, and it is not okay, right? That is not right. And these things can cause persons to go into depression, right? And then some persons might even go through PTSD, which is also known as post-traumatic stress disorder, where it prolongs their stresses. So you have this fear going out into public. You have this fear of doing your daily activities, and you can't really function without feeling scared, right? And that affects your mental health, right? And then some persons might even have low self-esteem, right? And this can cause their how to put it, their mental and psychological or psychosocial well-being to diminish, right? And all this together affects a person's psychological well-being, right? Sexual harassment is not okay, right? And I want to touch on boundaries. So boundaries is crucially important when it comes to relationships, right? It is so important to set boundaries, because if you don't do that, people would just take advantage of you, right? And you don't want to be what is called a people pleaser, right? You want to show people that, okay, you have to have respect when I say no. And it doesn't mean that you just have you want to take over what I am saying, or like do as you please, right? And if you don't set boundaries, this would damage your psychological well-being as well, right? Now, so I have some tips and solutions to this, right? So I mean, there are many different ways to set boundaries, but these are some 5 main tips that you can try. You need to communicate your thoughts with your partner. So when you do this, your partner would understand if you say, no, I'm not in the mood. And, your partner have to have that respect, right? That, okay, I'm not in the mood to have intercourse or any sexual activity or what have you, right? It means no. And that is you setting your boundary, right? And then another thing that is very important is to never assume or guess, right? I believe Scott was speaking about this earlier, right? Never assume your partner's feelings, right? And just think, okay, she probably want that because she had a long day, or vice versa. No, you have to ask permission, right? And I'll get to that point where we was talking about consent and reiterate those points. The third thing is to follow through with what you say. So don't just say, okay, I respect your boundaries, I wouldn't do that, but then you come and you physically or sexually assault me. That is not right, right? And again, it comes down to having respect and boundaries for your partner in a relationship. And imagine if you're in an intimate relationship and you don't set those boundaries, these same people in an intimate relationship, how they can react to persons in public space. You understand? Right? So these are some things that you have to follow through. And also take responsibility for your actions. So you have to also own up to when you do something wrong, and don't, lash out, and it gets violent, like one of my colleagues was saying, where you're trying to victim blame, right? These things can have a very, very a very harsh impact on someone's psychological well-being, right? And then last but not least, know when it's time to move on from a toxic, unhealthy relationship. I know that's very hard, because imagine like it have persons that are married and they have kids, right? And they are in a toxic relationship that can affect the family life, and it can affect how the kids, when they're growing up, they will have a kind of dysfunction in the family and whatnot. But sometimes it is always better if the partners go separate ways, because two people having this no respect for one another, and their boundaries, again, it comes back to that, can have a very, very bad impact on their psychological well-being, and it could lead to depression and everything that I explained, just like with harassment, PTSD and anxiety and all these things that will develop, and then it would turn into the person living with a lifetime disorder, right? And last but not least, I want to talk about oh, sorry, I forgot one of my points. So it is also very important, and I cannot emphasize this more, about sexual activity. You must give consent if you want to do that, and no means no, right? It is an agreement between both parties. It's not a one-way street. It is two people that, or two or more, depending on whatever relationship you have, when you are considering doing this activity, right? And this can change a person's life forever, right? With respect to their mental health, like many survivors that, if they were ever sexually assaulted or if they were raped, they would have probably have like flashbacks, and they would go through shame and guilt, and they would feel isolated, and all these feelings, right, of confusion and fear. All these things, it affects your mind, right? And that is not healthy, and it's not okay for anybody to go through. But we have survivors that studies have shown that this is what the impacts of persons that go through these things on a daily basis, right? And all this leads to some of the victims being susceptible to psychological issues, right? Just like I said, depression and PTSD, these are the very common, prevalent mental health problems that we face, right? If you are a victim of rape or sexual assault or any sexual harassment, right? And they can go from having very mild depression to very severe depression, and sometimes it leads to substance abuse and eating disorders or sleeping disorders and insomnia and all these different things, right, that affects your mind. You would not be at peace, right? So before I close, I know I'm on a tight schedule, and I believe all my colleagues touched on all the points that I wanted to talk about as well. And my point was to just raise awareness with how it impacts your mental health. I want ladies to learn to say no. Don't be afraid to speak up, right? And especially if there are you're in a situation that you cannot get out of like right away, try somehow to reach out. There are so many services available. I know some of them might be, hard to get because of the price and whatnot, but there are free social services that you can call and talk to somebody, let them know we are here, we want to listen, right? About whether you're young, you're old, it is important to speak up and reach out, especially when you are saying no and it is not being reciprocated to the partner that you are with. That is really not healthy for you, right? And men, be respectful to your partners, right? And let us try to build a better place for our children so that we could all live in harmony, right? Because if we don't set the examples as the adults, what do you expect for the children, right? And the cycle will always continue, right? And we need to continue to raise awareness like this. And yeah, that's all I have for now. I carry it back to you.
Tanid, your mic is muted.
I'm sorry. All right. I was basically saying thank you, Emily. A lot of really, great points, particularly towards the end when you called out to partners. You called out specifically to men, but I would like to call out to all partners, not
Yeah.
only men, to hear when your
Mhm.
partner says no. No means no, as Emily
Yeah.
very clearly articulated. But there are also other things that mean no. I'm not comfortable. That's not a yes.
Yep. Yep.
That I'm worried. That's not a yes. Um, you know, read body
Oh,
language.
I'm not ready. Yeah, I'm not ready. Or
Those
like,
aren't,
you know,
none of that is
there are
yes.
body languages and a lot of cues
Exactly.
that people can send off, and it's for you to understand that and reciprocate that respect.
Exactly. And if it's not yes, it is no. And if it's
Yep.
no, then you don't have consent. So do not pass go.
Exactly.
Do not proceed further, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just a call to all partners, not only men, but
Yes.
recognizing the type of society we live in where there is
Mhm.
this heteronormative privileging for men. We want to
Yeah.
call out particularly to men in relationships. You're not entitled to sex. It's not a right. Okay, if your
Exactly.
partner does not want to have sex with you, they do not need to have sex with you, and that is not a problem for them. If they don't want to, then they should not have to, right? That should be their right. It is their right. All right.
Mhm.
So on that note, wrapping us up, we would like to go to Kimberly before we engage an open conversation across all the panel members. Kimberly, take it away.
Great. Are you all hearing me?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity to engage with you all today. I have been enjoying the discussion so far, and I'll just begin with mine so we can discuss it in depth a little later on. So could you imagine a world where you can have sex with anyone you want, anywhere you want, and when you want? And I mean, that's not even the best part, right? The best part is that you will never contract a sexually transmitted infection or disease. These do not exist, unfortunately, right? And if you imagine a world where you will not conceive if you don't want to during that sexual encounter without the use of external hormones or preventative measures, a world where condoms are unheard of because, I mean, there's no need for them. Like, what is a pap smear? Wouldn't that be great? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, we do not live in such a world, right? And we must take caution when we engage in sexual activities. So, according to the World Health Organization, specifically in Europe, their chapter, sexual and reproductive health implies a wide range of health issues, right? Including family planning, maternal and newborn health care, prevention, diagnosis and treatment of STIs, including HIV, adolescent sexual and reproductive health, cervical cancer screening, infertility, prevention, and management. And these services aim at preventing poor sexual and reproductive health, as these type of poor SRH can cause complications such as pregnancy and childbirth, unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, complications caused by STIs, sexual violence, as we've been discussing, and women dying from unavoidable cancer, such as cervical cancer. So that list that I just went through are a list of things that can go wrong if you have poor sexual and reproductive health. Do you all think about this? Do we think about this on a daily basis? Do we think about this when we're planning our next encounter? These are things that we need to consider, right? Because the concept of sexual and reproductive health was really put forward in the International Conference on Population Development back in 1994, right? This is where reproductive health was defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease as we like to think about it, right? So in all matters relating to reproductive health system, to its functions, to its processes. So I just want to define what is an STI versus what is an STD, because sometimes we use the term interchangeably, but they are related but not the same. So sexually transmitted infection, as the name suggests, is just an infection that is transmitted through sexual contact or activity. Just the infection transmitted through sexual contact or activity. An infection is oftentimes the first step of disease, which occurs whether through bacteria or viruses that are entering the body, and then it starts multiplying. Looking at sexually transmitted disease now, this is a disruption of normal body function, right? Especially when signs and symptoms appear. So the disease usually happens after the infection. So for example, human papillomavirus or HPV, that is the infection. Cervical cancer, however, which can develop as a result of having HPV, that is a disease, right? So just to touch a little bit on STIs, they are caused by either bacteria or virus, as I mentioned just now. So STIs are caused by a bacteria. Those that are caused by bacteria are curable, and those that are caused by viruses are not curable. That is important to note, because once you get an STI that is caused by a virus, you have that for life. There is no getting rid of it. However, the symptoms are treatable. Right, so some common bacterial STIs, you all may be familiar with them. These are gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. And although chlamydia can be asymptomatic and gonorrhea as well, so what that means, you may not have signs or symptoms. So once you're sexually active, I am urging you, get tested for STIs. There are some that are asymptomatic, so you may have it, not know you have it, but it's still causing damage internally, as well as you can pass it on to your partner. So I wouldn't get into like signs and symptoms and so forth right now. One thing I do, and I always teach this to remember which infections are not curable or caused by a virus. They usually, to me, start with H. So when I was learning it, that's how I learned it. So HIV, HPV, herpes, hepatitis B, so to me, that's like a little clue to just kind of figure it out and remember. So I want to get into family planning itself a little bit. According to the World Health Organization, family planning allows individuals and couples to anticipate and attain their desired number of children and the spacing and timing of their births. That is important. It is achieved through use of contraceptive methods and the treatment of involuntary infertility. A woman's ability to space and limit her pregnancies has a direct impact on her health and well-being, as well as the outcome of each pregnancy. So, why family planning? It really helps you to avoid unwanted pregnancies. It is a form of birth control and also helps you to prevent sexually transmitted infections and diseases that I would have mentioned before. And some of the benefits of that, of course, is having more control over your life, being able to predict, yes, I want to do this now. No, I don't want to do this now. It really helps in that decision making. And of course, you have more financial capabilities, right? So you don't have someone or some persons depending on you in that regard, and you have a bit more freedom and empowerment with your finance, right? So this is done through basically use of contraceptives. So these are devices or drugs that are used to prevent pregnancy. Right? There are different methods. Some of them are hormonal, some are actual physical, tangible devices that you yourself can place and take out. So, for example, some contraceptives, they would inhibit the development and the release of the egg from the ovary. So you have the oral contraceptive pill, the patch, and the ring. Then we also have those that, if ovulation does occur, they would still have what we call a barrier method or blocking method. So this includes the male condom, which is very popular, female condom, spermicide, diaphragm, cervical cap. Now, I always like to list what's available because sometimes in telling people what their options are, they are then able to make a more informed decision. Sometimes people like, okay, I don't want to use a condom, or I don't like this and I don't like that. And it's like, the only method that they know or the main method that they know, but if they know of other methods, it would really improve their chances of having a really good family planning decisions within their life, right? So I just want to go from most effective to least effective. The most effective thing is abstinence, right? This was 100%. And when I say abstinence, I don't mean just abstain from sexual intercourse itself, abstinence from all sexual activity. That really helps. It keeps you on path. You don't put yourself at risk of getting an STI that can be transmitted through just touching or rubbing. You're abstaining from all of that. That is 100%, right? We also have long-acting reversible contraceptives. These are like the copper IUD, the implants, the hormonal IUDs, female and male sterilization. These are the permanent methods, right? We also have the Depo-Provera injections. Those are progesterone injections that last from about 3 months. Every 3 months you can go and get that injection done, right? And we do that here at Family Planning. So persons can also check us out on our social media platforms, can give us a call and whatnot to find out what's available, and we'll be able to assist as much as possible. Also, we have the estrogen progesterone contraceptives, which would be the pill, right? That is very, very common. The patch and a ring insertion. Barrier methods to contraception, as I mentioned before, would be male and female condoms, the diaphragm, and of course spermicides. And a lot of the times the diaphragms and the spermicides work hand in hand together. You could also have the male condom and the female condom work hand in hand together as well, right? We have other methods such as the natural family planning, right, where you basically do not have sex when the female is most fertile, and then you check it using the calendar or temperature and that type of thing. And I also want to mention before my time ends that emergency contraception, right? This is a plan B. It is called emergency for a reason, right? This is when after unprotected sexual intercourse, right? There are those that are ideally used within 72 hours, and there's a prescription one called Ella that you use up to 120 hours after intercourse. This is not to be used as a regular pill, right? So if you want a regular pill, that is available, but emergency contraception, I don't expect persons to have an emergency every few days or every week, right? And my call to action is about safety, right? So I really want to mention the ABCDE, right, of being safe when it comes to your sexual and reproductive health. Sex is always risky, right? So there are safer ways to have sex, but no one way is 100% safe, right? And the safest thing you can do is abstain, as I said before, from sex and all sexual activities. That, takes me to the ABC of prevention. So number one, you abstain from sex and all sexual activities. 2, be faithful. And of course, this works best if both partners are faithful. C, condomize. Also, another C is use contraception. Perfect for family planning. D, do get tested for HIV and other STIs regularly, right? And here at Family Planning, we do HIV testing, we do STI testing as well. Also, I want to add a do, which is do go get tested for cervical cancer by doing your pap smears, ladies, right? Once you're sexually active, you need to start doing your pap smear, and we do that here as well at Family Planning. And E, final letter that I'll be touching on, is educate yourself. Educate yourself on STIs, on transmission, on even gender-based violence. I'll be touching on today. Educate yourself. See what is law, see what is legal, what is illegal, right? Ways to negotiate condom use. These are things you can educate yourself on. The different contraceptive methods available. So I would have mentioned that the significance of getting tested and where tests could be done and where contraceptives can be obtained, right? So that is my call to action, the A, B, C, D, and E for everyone on this live here today. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much so much for that, Kimberly, and thank you for that perspective from the FPATT, Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of really important points were touched on, but at this point, we want to allow Kevin Ramjatan from SCORA TTMSA to give us the pair version of what Kimberly just said. So Kevin is speaking similarly to, safety in relationships and safe sex and STIs and so on. So take it away, Kevin.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Ramjatan, the National Officer for the Standing Committee on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, including HIV and AIDS, representing the TTMSA. So firstly, according to the World Health Organization, sexual health is a physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It is not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. Sexual health requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relations, as well as possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. For sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. So from this definition, we can see that sexual health, it doesn't only mean the act of sex itself, and a lot of persons in our society today believe that sex is only about intercourse. And from this definition we just received, we can now bring on elements of sexual health. So these include sexual and reproductive health, sexuality and gender roles, relationships, mental health, consent, and gender-based violence. And now I'd like to talk a little bit on safe sex. So as Kimberly, she mentioned some things before. So safe sex is all about protecting yourself and your partners from sexually transmitted infections. So safer sex help you stay healthy and can even make sex better. So STDs, these are infections, and these are passed from one person to another during sexual activity. So anybody who has oral sex, anal sex, vaginal sex, or contact with genitalia of a person who is infected with an STD or STI, they can contract an STD. So safe sex now. This just means protecting yourself and your partner from STDs when you have sex. And just to mention some of the methods, so you have abstinence and the use of condoms or barrier methods, have fewer or one intimate partner, and get tested. So I like to speak about on abstinence. So I know Kimberly mentioned abstinence as the most important method and the only way, but one thing it was known and studies have shown that abstinence alone doesn't help alone. So also you should mention condoms, as condoms have known, because when persons are sexually active, they wouldn't really care about abstinence. So engaging them in using condoms will be much better. And now testing for HIV, who should get tested? So all sexually active individuals should get tested. All adolescents from and adults from age 13 to 64 should be tested. All pregnant women should be tested. All sexually active gay and bisexual men should be tested. And anyone who has unsafe sex or shares injection or drug equipment should be tested. And while in Trinidad and Tobago, testing is free in our public health facilities, and most STDs are curable and some can be treated. So using HIV and herpes as an example, they can be treated and where their viral loads wouldn't be detectable. So persons with HIV and herpes, they can then, once they have proper treatment and their viral load is below the detectable limit, they can actually have sex, because undetectable means untransmittable. And now I'd like to touch a little bit on consent. So consent and condoms. In a lot of relationships, specific where the male, they don't tend to use condoms because they say that the condoms, it reduces the intimacy, it reduces pleasure. But condoms and consent can go hand in hand, because women, they have the choice if they would want to have safe sex or not safe sex. So they can withdraw from sexual activity if their partner chooses not to to wear a condom. And consent in relationships. So being in a relationship, a lot of persons tend to think that they don't have a choice of consent, but consent is freely given. And being in a relationship, you have a lot of emotions, and as humans, your emotions change regularly. So this can leave the people not being in the mood for sex. So consent, how does consent actually improve relationships? So consent can build stronger relationships by viewing how your partner's verbal cues and non-verbal cues of consent. This will allow a better understanding in relationships and allow for better communication between relationships. It can help you understand what makes your partner feel good. And one thing I like to mention, which was mentioned by several panelists again, so before or during the sexual activity, consent can be withdrawn, and when consent is withdrawn, all sexual activity must stop. And that's all I have. Now I'll just send it back to Dina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I mean, I really like this last bit here, how Kimberly and Kevin came right after each other, because not only did we get to see two different perspectives, but two real perspectives in our society. And I like that we were able to share that. So a couple of points that I think, Kimberly mentioned, and then Kevin gave a slight tangential direction to it. The first point, let me just get my point, sorry. On abstinence, yes, we know abstinence is 100% foolproof from getting pregnant or an STD, but the reality is if you're sexually active, you're not about to abstain, because sexually active as in I'm having sex, and right? So on that note, yes, ideally we want to educate persons on what is the safe way of going about having sex if you are sexually active. Because to say, oh, I'm sexually active but I'm abstaining, kind of seems like a contradiction, because again, the point there is that you're having sex. So if you're having sex, do it as safely as you can,
So
right?
I agree with you there in terms of if you are having sex, of course, you try to use the safest ways or methods possible, because some can be used, together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then, I
And
mean,
then
I don't want to take away from, there are people who, yes, they are not virgins, but they also would have made up their mind to no longer have sex for different reasons, whether it be religious reasons, whether it be mental reasons, so there are people who would have managed to, yes, they would have been sexually active at a point in time, they still would have made a conscious decision to practice some sort of self-control for whatever the reason is, to be able to abstain later on. So it is possible, right? It came across a bit like it's not possible, but it is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible.
Right. On that note, I would say privilege consent. If someone has been having sex, but they don't want to, then they don't have to. So that takes us from, okay, if you're having it, have it safely. If you don't want to have it, make sure and indicate directly, and partners respect your person's lack of consent. If they do not consent, then we are not passing go, right? Yeah, we're not collecting that $200.
200.
All right. And then another point I wanted to make is that when you said faithful, and not something that automatically resonated with me, is that in our cultural context, when you hear the term have a faithful partner, we are actually speaking to an ideology of what a particular relationship looks like. And that is the heteronormative monogamous relationship. And that's not everyone's relationship. All right. So just to, reclaim that word faithful, I would like faithful to mean consent given and full disclosure. All right. So whether it's a polyamorous relationship and there are 2-3 other partners involved, everybody must have full disclosure and everybody must give consent.
I completely agree with full disclosure, but it also must be noted that the more sexual partners you
The
have,
higher the risk.
the higher the risk of
Yes.
contracting an STI. So it must be noted, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to add into this conversation, where persons may not even want to be in a relationship but just want to have casual sex, people do it. It's current. And the way to be safe here is be conscious of who your partners are and get tested together. As tested together. It's a date. I'm making that a date. That's our first date.
Yeah.
Casual sex on the scene, in a party, and go afterwards after the party, do whatever you want to do. We look for the signs of different STIs. Speak to the partner. If you don't trust the person you're speaking to, be conscious of all those things. You can't get everything in one night, so up to the person what they want to do.
I'm glad that you said testing together, because sometimes what we find is a partner or certain partners may say, "When you get tested now, once you good, we good," and it happens a lot, mostly in heterosexual relationships, as far as I know. where the female would more readily go get tested, and the male would say, no, once you're good, I good. You get tested, we good together. So it's really important to know that, your partner should, go with you to the facility to get tested.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love how Darren said, make it a date. That's the first date, we getting tested together,
Yeah.
If we're going down this road, let's do it together, right? Show some support and all of that, right? So just to wrap and close, I think the key points that came out, definitely consent, all right, and safety. All right. And on that note, to all students viewing, please join the MS Teams. There is a link to the MS Teams form, registration form. You can still register, and when you click the registration form, in the registration form's description is the link to join the MS team to continue this conversation privately. Only students. It's a safe space for you to air your comments, ask your questions, and just talk. All right. And that's a wrap, peeps. Bye. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks to all the participants, all the collaborators, all the clubs, SPA, SDAT, Scorer, FPA, TT. Have I left out any IGD? Well, obviously IGDS Ignite. So yeah, everyone, thank you for coming out. Thank you for supporting.